Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm here tonight because of these two, really. We get a lot of requests for me to go interact with places, go to different places. I've never been to Edmonton, and I've wanted to come here for a long time. The reason I'm here in the middle of December is because you asked, and I could not say no. You have some great local leadership here, and you have some great local conversations going on here, and you have some people doing some amazing work. And so I hope whatever comes of this very short trip that I have here to Edmonton, it's too short. I would like to be able to go do more. I'm flying out early tomorrow morning, and so I'm only here a short period of time. Please take it as an affirmation. I really, really wanted to be here. I really want to be part of your conversation in honor of the idea that you all are doing some amazing things, some things that are showing up, not just in our feed and in our stuff, but in other places that we go. People are talking about you. People are talking about Edmonton. They're talking about your local leadership. They're talking about your conversation. They're talking about some of the things you're doing. You all are leaders throughout North America. And I just wanted to start with that and say thank you. Thanks for the invitation and thanks for being here. I showed up at 6 because that's what it said on my agenda. And it said 6 to 7, the doors will be open, and at 7 we'll start. And when I got here, the place was full of Canadians, and I'm like, wow, you people are prompt. Thanks for your patience tonight. I will make it worth your time. When we think about cities, I want to talk a little bit about complex systems, because complexity is really a theme throughout all of Strong Towns, how we deal with complexity. When we look at rainforests, we understand that a rainforest is a complex system, right? It's a complex ecosystem made up of many different flora and fauna. They all act, in a sense, independently of each other, yet in kind of this cooperative competition with each other. When we look at a rainforest, we recognize that it has a certain order to it, but that order is not imposed on it. It is something that emerges from all these kind of fractal interactions. In our minds, it's easy for us to get that understanding of a rainforest in that way. What is a little bit of a leap for us, but I think we should go there right now, is the idea that human habitat, particularly human habitat of the past, had this same emergent kind of quality to it. If aliens are watching us, right, and have been monitoring humans for thousands of years, up until very recently, they would have looked down and said, we're looking at bees, and bees build beehives in a certain way. And we're looking at ants, and ants build ant mounds in a similar way. And we're looking at this species called human, and boy, they're very interesting. They build their cities in a certain way. And that certain way, like bees and like ants, is emergent. It is a lot of like random things going on that come together and emerge in a place. Systems that are complex are different from systems that are merely complicated. A Rube Goldberg machine is really complicated, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. In fact, a lot of stuff going on is the novelty of a Rube Goldberg machine. But everybody in this room understands that if you cut one of these strings or move one of these blocks, the Rube Goldberg machine doesn't evolve and adapt. A new system doesn't emerge. What happens to it? It just breaks, right? It just stops working. This is the difference between systems that are complex and systems that are merely complicated. If you take an automobile engine is designed by really, really intelligent people. It's a very complicated machine. But if we stress an automobile engine beyond what its design capacity is, it doesn't evolve and adapt and become a wash machine or a toaster, right? It just stops being an engine. It just breaks. This ability to adapt and evolve is the difference between systems that are complex and systems that are merely complicated. And so, I went too far too fast. When we look at a rainforest, we recognize that if a rainforest gets a little bit too much rain or a little bit too much sun in any one season, it doesn't fail, right? It doesn't collapse. It might evolve a little bit. Different flora or fauna might become more predominant in the ecosystem, but it will survive variations in climate. When we look at a cornfield, however, cornfields are very complicated systems. They're designed to maximize the output of corn. If a cornfield, this complicated system, gets a little bit too much rain or a little bit too much sun, it doesn't evolve and become soybeans or potatoes, right? It just stops being good corn. We see the same kind of behavior in our human habitat. When we build places that are bottom up, when we build places that are complex, when we build places that are designed to adapt over time, what we see is that they can withstand periods of time of tremendous growth and prosperity, times of low growth and low prosperity. They can endure in all conditions. When we look at our modern development pattern is designed for one thing. It's designed to grow. It's designed to be replicated over and over and over again. And what we see is that that growth has tremendous advantage in the short term from an economic standpoint. Long term, however, we're stuck with a development pattern that lacks the ability to evolve, lacks the ability to adapt, resists change in a way that makes our cities very, very fragile. This is my hometown. I don't think we said this anywhere, but I'm from a little city called Brainerd, Minnesota. Minnesota is like Canada South, right? When I come north to Canada, it's like, oh, I found a better version of Minnesotans. We like to think of ourselves as very friendly, very practical, very decent people. When I come up here, I run into Minnesotans aplenty, so I always feel very comfortable coming north. This is what my city looked like back in 1870. This is the very first iteration of my hometown. These little pop-up shacks. Some people got off the train here, chopped down the wood, planed it out, and put up these little cheap buildings. I want you to look at this city because this could be Edmonton. In fact, Edmonton began, if we had a photo of what it was like in its early days, it would look just like this. In fact, every city that was ever founded in all of human history, prior to our kind of 20th century experiment in city building, every single city that was ever built started just like this. Some little hopes and some dreams about the future, a tiny little investment. When people made investments like this, what they were hoping for is that the city would ultimately attract more people and grow. What happened if it didn't? Well, we built thousands of these across North America. And for a variety of reasons that really are kind of complex and lack kind of predictive power, a lot of these places would fail. And when they failed, did the economy crash? Did everything go? No. A few people lost a little bit of money. They salvaged what they could, and they moved on to the next place. These are little bets about the future, right? And if they don't work out, they don't work out. But when they do work out, something magical happens. More and more people move to the place. The place starts to grow incrementally. It starts to grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. As people move to the city, the land values and the center of the city start to become greater. At the same time, these cheap little buildings start to fall apart. That actually creates a natural redevelopment opportunity where people would buy these little shacks and convert them into more substantial buildings. This is the same exact street 35 years later. And as the city continued to grow incrementally, growing incrementally up, incrementally out, and then thickening up, maturing in place, becoming incrementally more intense, ultimately these 2- and 3-story wood structures would be replaced by buildings of brick and granite. This is the same street a couple decades later. This is the kind of organic, natural pattern of development that we see replicated around the world for thousands and thousands of years. I started to get a little bit of pushback on my Brainerd narrative, saying, well, Chuck, this is great, but this isn't how cities, have historically grown. Like, this isn't how cities become real big and substantial. And I have to just do a little bit of digression, because some of you, if you're thinking this, I want you to dissuade you of this right away. Tell me when you recognize this city. I don't have the old, like pre-photograph photos of this city, but here's a recognizable place in 1878. Here's what it looked like I'm not sure why my thing is having a hard time. It's my own computer and my own clicker, so it should be working fine. Here's the same place in 1898. Do you recognize it yet? 1911. I don't have any of the interim ones, but here's the place today. So the thing about the traditional development pattern, the thing about this incremental development pattern, is that it works really, really well in small places and small neighborhoods. It also works great in large places and large communities. This idea that we grow things organically can grow very, very fast and also grow very, very big, very robustly, right? It's about the iterative process. So when we look at my hometown, here's again the 1870 photo, 1905, and now we're in the 1920s, and then I want to show you what this looks like today. Yeah. It's a wasteland of parking and half-occupied buildings, right? I want to plant a pin in this photo for you to kind of ponder later or ponder throughout this talk. When I'm an engineer, I'm a planner. When I look at this photo and pray for my wife, when I look at this photo, I start looking at the infrastructure in place, right? We've got a wide street, we've got sidewalks, we've got street lights, we've got drainage systems, we've got sewer and water. There's $500,000 invested in that just 2-block stretch right there. When we add up all the public investment, this is about $500,000. Where is the wealth that we are going to tap into to sustain that investment? Where's the wealth that we are going to call on to say, all right, it's time to fix this street, it's time to fix this pipe, it's time to fix this thing? Where is that wealth? It used to be there, right? It used to be there in spades. We used to be one of the most wealthiest blocks in the city. It is no longer there. And it's that conundrum, it's that problem that is the one we have created for ourselves. This is the central kind of strong towns question. What is the difference between a city that grows and a city that builds wealth and capacity? When we look at this, and you guys did the kind of prerequisite groan when I showed you this, it doesn't offend me. We could walk around your city and find very similar ones, right? So this is a shared experience. I have found that you have to show places of other cities. The few times that I've been invited to give a presentation in my own hometown, I cannot show pictures of my hometown because they're very personal for people. So I recognize that part of what the trick is here is that I'm showing you a place that reminds you of yours, but is not yours. So you can think about it kind of more openly. But the question that this should prompt, the question that this should give to us is, why did humans do this? Why did we take a well-evolved habitat, right? A very mature habitat, a habitat that had substantial buildings, and why did we, in a sense, tear them down, go crazy, change our approach? There's a lot of very simplistic answers to this, and I find them all to be lacking, right? Well, we have automobiles now, or, we have different values today, Chuck, or, the people back then were hardier and stronger, and we're just whatever today. There's all kinds of silly ways to describe this. I think it's important for us to be generous about people of the past. I think it's important for us to be generous when we think about their motivations, because we want people to be generous to us and our motivations in the future when they look back on us, right? And so I always struggle with, what were they thinking at the time? My grandfather was a Marine in World War II. He grew up in the Great Depression. He would tell me stories about this. One of the stories he told me is that during the Depression, he couldn't live at home. There were a bunch of reasons why, but he wound up moving out at age 13, 14, and the neighbors allowed him to live there. He slept in the barn, and they fed him, and then he worked the farm. And he told me that he felt very lucky, that he was better off than most people. This is in Minnesota, so sleeping in the barn, not exactly a cozy experience. My takeaway from that was the Depression was really hard. And it was hard in a way that we, in a modern sense, struggle to understand or struggle to really fully comprehend. The Great Depression was one of these periods of time where nobody understood really what was happening. They couldn't really explain why everything stopped working, why the economy failed, why unemployment was so high, why things were so in such great distress. In fact, if you read books about the Depression today, you can read a book from an economist that will say, here's what caused the Depression. And they've got a very coherent narrative, and you're like, well, that's very, very smart. And then you'll read another economist, and they'll say, here's what caused the Depression. And it's the exact opposite cause. There's nothing in relation to the first one. And you'll read that, and you go, well, that's very, very smart. Like, that makes a lot of sense. The reality is nobody really understood. And nobody today can even satisfactorily explain what caused the Great Depression. Even more kind of disillusioning or confusing was nobody knew how to get out of the Great Depression. Right? The whole New Deal project in the United States was an attempt to try a whole bunch of different things to see if we could get the economy going again. The thing that we are taught, and I know you are taught this too because I've met enough Canadians and had this conversation, the thing we are taught that got us out of the Great Depression was World War II, right? And you know that our cultural dialogue is dominated by economists when you answer a question in that way, right? We're having all this hardship and bad times, and then yippee, war, right? Only economists think like that, right? Only people who are looking at spreadsheets and don't care at all about human suffering, they're the only people who reach that conclusion. Because of course, World War II was not like the happy times, right? The only people it was happy for was the people who were looking at gross domestic product, because wow, it went way, way up. If you think about shipping millions of people overseas to kill and to die, drafting millions more into the industries that would build the ships and the planes and the munitions, you can make a GDP figure go up, right? But that is not prosperity, right? That's not prosperity. At the end of World War II, there was a fear amongst economists here in Canada, in the United States, and really across the Allied nations, that when the war ended, we were going to see significant economic dislocation. This is a quote from Paul Samuelson, who's one of the senior economic advisors to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was actually probably the premier US economist of the last century. He said, if this war is going to end, if this war ended right now, we would have the greatest period of economic dislocation that any economy has ever seen. Basically, if we demobilize millions of troops, we shut down all these industries, nothing is different about our economy today than it was a decade ago. And we're just going to slide right back into the depths of the Great Depression. That's what they believed as World War II was winding down. Is that what happened? No, right? No. We did something very, very different. We did something very radical and very different. We said, we can build a middle class, we can grow an economy, we can create prosperity for a large number of people, and I will note, and I think it's worth noting, not all people were included in this vision from the beginning. I think, again, if we're generous to people of the past, many people hoped that it would ultimately include everybody, but it didn't. But the idea was, if we could just create an economy that would grow very, very quickly, all kinds of good things would happen. And to do this, we looked to our cities. And we said, we can turn our cities not into these things that, organic systems that grow incrementally over time, but we can supercharge that growth by giving them highways, infrastructure, housing subsidies, and all kinds of other things to turn cities into engines of growth, into kinetic growth machines. And here's the thing, it was wildly successful. So it's wildly successful. Here in North America, we still kind of glorify those couple of decades at the end of World War II as this golden age for our cultures. You may not know this, but next year's a presidential year in the United States. I'm going to make myself laugh. On behalf of Minnesotans, I won't speak for all Americans, but I will speak for Minnesotans here for a second. I apologize for our cultural imperialism and the fact that you have to suffer through our politics the way that you do. I apologize. It is hard enough for us. I hate to know what it's like for the rest of the world to watch this train wreck happen every 4 years. Without being political, right? I want you to go back to the 2016 election, which I know you remember. This was Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. And I want you to recognize something about that election. In that election, you had two 70-ish-year-old candidates describing a vision for America that was a recreation of their youth. Whether that was a Make America Great Again kind of platform of blue-collar jobs and Ozzie and Harriet type of families, or whether it was a vision of an expansive federal government that could do things like grow social programs, expand Social Security, do things that would expand the role of government. Whatever the vision was, they were both drawing on those two magical decades at the end of World War II, when everything was easy and everything seemed possible. I want to show you what this looks like on the ground, because it's actually a profound, profound shift. Oh, I keep shutting this off and doing other goofy things. I think I'm in line for a new clicker is what I'm gathering from this. This is a map of Fresno, California. And I'm going to show you Fresno, California, not because I think you are Fresno, but because I have good maps of Fresno. And this map tells a story, but again, it will be a story that will look familiar to you, right? This is one that you will recognize yourself in. What this little yellow box here in the middle signifies that is the boundaries of Fresno, California as they existed in 1897. And what I'm going to show you now is how those boundaries change over time. I have some snapshots of this. So here is 1909. Here's 1922. Now we're going to go to the middle of the Great Depression and then the end of World War II. You'll note that incremental development pattern, right? The city growing incrementally up, incrementally out, thickening up over time, becoming more mature, this organic, complex type of growth. And note that there was growth in Fresno during the Great Depression. There was growth in Fresno during World War II. One of the amazing things about this historic organic development pattern is that it can actually grow during times of high nourishment and during times of low nourishment, right? The pace might be different, the scale might be different, but there still is a churning that goes on there. Now we're at the end of World War II. We don't want to slide back into the Great Depression. We want to continue to grow. We want to create a middle class. We want to see a lot of prosperity. We're going to turn our cities into machines of growth. And here's what happens. 1958, 1970, 1983. Here's the mid-1990s. And the last one I have is from 2010. My city, Brainerd, Minnesota, at the end of World War II was 13,500 people. Today, my city is 13,500 people. It's 10 times the area. Same population, 10 times the area. 10 times the road, 10 times the pipe, 10 times the amount of area we have to provide police and fire protection for, 10 times. Does this look familiar to you? Yes, this is very Edmonton, right? We all participated in this in very much the same way. I want to show you some of the implications of this because this approach does what it promises to do, right? It creates a lot of growth. And again, if you are an economist and you are working with spreadsheets, you're counting your beans, you don't care about human flourishing or prosperity, all you care about is, number go up kind of thing. Sorry to all the economists in the audience. I did write a book called Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, so I'm not, picking on one profession only. If you're an economist, these numbers go up from this development pattern. But if you're a city, and let me be clear what I mean by a city, if you are people living in a community in which the city is your kind of highest form of collaboration at the local level, the implications of this development pattern are very, very different, particularly as time goes on. This is data that a good friend of mine named Joe Minicozy and his firm Urban 3, I joined them in Lafayette, Louisiana to put this stuff together. I'm going to show you a map of Lafayette later on, but I'm going to start with this data. At the end of World War II, the population was a little over 33,000. Today, it's a little over 120,000. That's a 3.5 times rate of growth since the end of World War II. That's a very robust amount of growth. But if we look and say, what did it take to provide drinking water for the people of Lafayette? At the end of World War II, it took 5 feet of pipe per person. Today, it takes 10 times that amount. What did it take to provide fire protection for the people of Lafayette? Well, at the end of World War II, it took 2.4 hydrants per 1,000 people. Today, it takes 21 times that amount. And so, while the city has experienced rapid amount of growth, right? They've added a lot of people. They've grown their long-term liabilities and obligations by even more, by way, way more. Now, I'm sure there are people in the audience who are saying, well, okay, Chuck, I get it, that makes sense, but we're so much wealthier today. We're so much more prosperous today. We have bigger houses, we have more cars, we have more stuff. None of us want to go back to living the way they did in 1945. Look at all the things we would need to give up. We are so much more prosperous today. And the question that I would have to you is, how are you measuring prosperity? Because when we look at the numbers, what we see is that while we are able to grow very, very quickly at GDP and population, we're able to grow our economy very, very quickly by taking on lots and lots and lots of long-term liabilities. What we see is that it's not reflected in household wealth. It's not reflected in household income. We grow our liabilities by 10 times and 20 times, but our household income in a city like Lafayette's only grown by 1.6 times. When we look at things like family net worth, what we see is that more families have a negative net worth in Lafayette than a positive. They owe more than they actually have in wealth. And that number is growing every year. I want to show you what this looks like on the ground. Because as cities, we make decisions every day about where we invest, where we grow, how we develop. And the pattern that we're in, the pattern that we've, in a sense, inherited from this generation that went through the Great Depression and World War II, is a pattern that generates a lot of growth very, very quickly, but does not create the wealth that is needed to sustain and take care of itself. These are 2 identical blocks in my hometown. If you look at this neighborhood, you'll see these blocks are the same size, the same area. They have the same amount of public infrastructure investment. They're on the same thoroughfare. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development. In the 1920s, as my city was growing incrementally, that next increment of out were these 3 blocks here. So remember we talked about the city growing complex adaptive pattern, incrementally up, incrementally out, incrementally more intense. In the 1920s, this was the far edge of town. This was the increment of out. I showed you those pop-up shacks from the 1870s. This is the 1920s version, that building, that stuff on the left. It's the 1920s version of the pop-up shack. And the people that built these in the 1920s would have assumed that over time the city would continue to grow as cities had grown for thousands of years, incrementally further out. they would have been relationally closer to the center of town. Their land would have become more valuable. Ultimately, those buildings would be redeveloped with second stories, third stories. They were getting in on the front end of a classic development scenario that they had seen work out for thousands of years around the world. Of course, that's not what happened. These 3 blocks were built on the edge of town in the 1920s. Then we had the Great Depression. Then we had World War II. Then we have the kinetic growth machine skip right over these properties and start building out on the edge. This neighborhood has stagnated for almost a century. The block on the right used to look just like the block on the left. The city was able to get it torn down, and in its place, we got the Taco John's drive-thru. I realize, having come up here a few times now into Canada, that you all do not have Taco John's. I think the best way culturally to describe Taco John's is Norwegian Mexican food. Lots of mild cheddar cheeses, salts. We really like Taco John's. Let's be clear. Everybody was thrilled about this transaction. Everybody at City Hall was thrilled. The broad consensus of the community was that this was a good thing. We got rid of blight, right? We got rid of a block of blight. In its place, we got a development that met all the zoning codes, all the building codes. It has ADA compliant bathrooms. It has commercial sprinkler systems. It has an ample parking lot. We got rid of the on-street parking, so the traffic flows more smoothly. We were able to have a bike advocacy group come in and ask for a sidewalk, bike walk group. They built that sidewalk there. The sidewalk ends right there, but they built that stretch. When you look at all the things that we wanted to see in a development, this checked every box. What nobody bothered to look at and nobody bothered to consider was that that block on the left, that old blighted rundown block, has a total value of $1.1 million. When you look at the block on the right, the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure, the same long-term cost to the community to provide ongoing service and maintenance, it has a value of only $600,000. There's 78% more wealth in the property on the left than on the right. There's more jobs in the block on the left than on the right. There's, of course, more local business ownership in the block on the left than on the right. We went out and did a survey and asked some of those business owners, where do you bank? Where do you advertise? Do you have an attorney? And what we saw over and over again is that they used local services, professional services throughout the community, where the block on the right did not. When we look at this as an ecosystem, right, what we see is that the block on the left is in its most dilapidated state. It really can't go down any further from here, right? There's not a lot of step down. Yet, it is massively outperforming financially the stuff we're building brand new today. And it's not even close. And everybody in this room knows what the future of that Taco John's is, right? 20 years from now, it will be a used car lot, right? There'll be a new Taco John's up the road somewhere. 10 years later, it will be boarded up, and we'll be trying to get some type of tax subsidy to get it redeveloped. The traditional development pattern, this way we built as humans, our habitat, for thousands and thousands of years, allowed us to start very small and then have tremendous upside potential. While the development pattern we use today creates a lot of growth and transaction in the short term, but lacks that upside, lacks that resiliency, lacks that adaptability. This is a really compelling case study, but it is not a cherry-picked example. This is actually a trend we see over and over and over in cities around the world, really. I'm going to show you some maps that were created by Urban 3, my friend Joe Minicozy and his team out of Asheville. But let me describe what you're going to be seeing here. What I'm going to show you is a map of financial productivity of different cities. The way to think about financial productivity is like this. Think of a farmer spreading seed across a field. The parts of the field that grow up the most robustly we would say that's the most productive part of the field. That's where you get the most bushels, we would say in the US, bushels per acre, right? Like the productivity. Where do you get the most value per acre? Where do you have the greatest level of financial productivity? Where has our development pattern produced the most wealth per area? This is a map of Buffalo, New York. And I'd start with Buffalo, New York. I have a soft spot for Buffalo. I very much like them. They're very good people. I've been to Buffalo a few times. But Buffalo is also, in many ways, a very sad city. Buffalo used to be one of the wealthiest cities, not just in North America, but in the world. Its kind of peak was in the early 1900s. If you go there, you can still see remnants of that wealth in opulent buildings that are very underutilized today. The post-war development pattern has been brutal on Buffalo. They have received a lot of subsidies to try to grow. They've grown very aggressively out on the edge. But despite this, Buffalo has lost population every single year since the end of World War II. Every single year, including last year. Fewer people live in Buffalo than the year prior. Yet when we step back and we say, where's the wealth in Buffalo? It's in the traditional downtown. It's in the pre-Great Depression neighborhoods. It's in the parts of the city that were built prior to this kinetic growth strategy. And again, much like the Taco John's and the old and blighted block in my hometown, it's not even close. The stuff that we have built prior to this new experiment, this new way of building, financially outperforms everything else around it. This is a pattern we see repeated again and again and again. And it doesn't matter the size of the city. It can be a huge city. It can be a mid-sized city. It can be a small city. It doesn't matter if it is a northern city or a southern city, if it's on water or if it's inland. It doesn't matter. The thing we see over and over again is when you have the pre-Great Depression neighborhoods, those neighborhoods that were assembled organically over time, where you have neighborhoods that are walkable, neighborhoods with corner stores, neighborhoods with all the kind of thing that we associate with that pre-Depression development pattern, even when they are occupied by the poorest people in the community, tend to perform financially fantastic. They outperform everything that we have built subsequent. And again, it's not even close. I told you that I would show you a map of Lafayette, Louisiana. This is that map. The maps that I've shown you prior were maps, you can think of it as the financial productivity as wealth. Where's the wealth of the community, right? This map is different. It looks similar because there's a strong correlation between wealth and what I'm going to show you now. What this is a map of is profit and loss. Where are the parts of the city that are generating more taxes than expenses? And where are the places that are not? In Lafayette, Louisiana, they had a mayor who was a very innovative person. He was, well, I like telling this story, and we're doing okay on time. For those of you that don't know, again, I will apologize for inundating you with our culture. Louisiana is a very southern state. In our nomenclature, it is a very conservative place, very red in our politics. They pride themselves in being very fiscally prudent, if we want to be generous. We don't have to be, but we can. The mayor prided himself on running a very tight ship in the city, right? We don't waste money. We're not San Francisco. We're not California. We're very fiscally prudent. Yet, the mayor recognized that they had a 30-year backlog of road maintenance. Their road maintenance backlog, every year when they got to the end of the year, they were doing their budget. They said, here's how much we can spend on maintenance. Here's how much we should spend on maintenance. All right, that goes into the backlog, and we'll get to that at some point in the future. Over the years, that backlog had grown to be a 30-year backlog. He was being pressured to raise taxes, and he wanted to understand what would raising taxes actually solve. And so he invited Joe and I to come in and try to help him figure this out. And the question he asked is, why are we broke? We've done everything right. We've run very fiscally prudent government. We've invested in growth and infrastructure. We've done all the things we're supposed to do. Why are we broke? And so what we did is we went out and we mapped up every ongoing expense the city had. Where are all the roads? Where are all the pipes? Where are all the drainage systems? Where are you providing fire protection and police protection? Where are your parks and your public buildings? We mapped all these up and we put dollar amounts to them. Then we looked at every source of income they had. Where are you collecting sales tax? Where are you collecting property tax? Where are you collecting utility fees? And we mapped all that up. And at the end, we had like 3 dozen different maps. We mashed them all together and we came up with this profit and loss map. Every place you see a blue parcel is a parcel that pays more every year in taxes and fees than they require in ongoing service and maintenance. Every place you see a red parcel, it's the exact opposite. These places require more in service and maintenance than they pay annually in taxes and fees. The higher the line goes, the more the disparity is. That part in the middle, that is their core downtown. I'm going to show you a photo of that in a second. This little crescent of blue right here, that's the original neighborhood of Lafayette. That's kind of the oldest part of town. It's also the poorest part of town. Here's some photos of what those places look like. In the upper right there, you have their core downtown. I'm going to say this. I love Lafayette. They're very nice people. I enjoy going there. You can go to the downtown and they have great Zydeco music and you can get really cheap tacos, but nobody goes downtown and takes photos and like posts them on Instagram. It's a place that really, really struggles, right? At the same time, these neighborhoods here, right, look very, very poor. They are very, very poor. And just so we're clear, the analysis that we did assumes that the city actually goes out and fixes the street, maintains the ditches, replaces the street lights. The fact that they're not doing that in these neighborhoods means that that blue line is even higher in reality than what we show. What are those red areas? Well, the red areas out on the edge are all the stuff that we've grown used to, right? That's the malls, the strip malls, the big box stores, the drive-through franchise restaurants, the windy cul-de-sac-y suburban homes. In Lafayette, Louisiana, and I'm going to give you these numbers, please put them in a local context. The median household in Lafayette pays $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. They'll pay other taxes to the state, to the parish, to the school district, but $1,500, the median family, goes to the city. In order for the city of Lafayette to clear that road backlog, to maintain everything that they have promised to maintain, to fix every road, fix every pipe, take care of things as it falls apart, the median family taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 a family makes would need to get sent back to the city just for the city to maintain the critical infrastructure they now have. That is not going to happen. That is never going to happen. And so what we see in Lafayette, Louisiana is what we see in cities all over North America. This annual decision. What roads do we maintain? What roads do we walk away from? What pipes do we take care of? What pipes do we let fall apart? What neighborhoods do we secure? And what neighborhoods do we turn our back on? I wrote the first book, Strong Towns. And at the end of the 3rd chapter, I had this little conversation about Detroit. And I made this observation that we are all on the same path as Detroit. And my mom called me up. She was reading the early edition before it went out. And she said, "Chucky, this is a very sad book." I said, "Yes, Mom, but keep reading, it gets better." I think when we look at a city like Detroit, and really, I don't think there's a Canadian equivalent of Detroit, right? Detroit is, in many ways, this avatar of failure. And it's a failure that, if you are politically progressive, you have a very strong narrative to explain what happened that aligns with your worldview. And if you are politically conservative, you have a very strong narrative that aligns with your worldview to explain what happened. And those two disparate worldviews have only one point in common. And that one point in common is, my city is not Detroit. I think the story of Detroit is actually very simple. Detroit was one of the wealthiest cities in the world. If you go to Detroit today, and I strongly recommend that you do, it is an astounding place. Go to the downtown and just walk around and look at the old buildings. They have an opera house there that if you picked it up and set it in Milan, it would not be out of place. Like 5 decks, opulent like chandeliers. It's astounding the wealth that they had in Detroit. In the early 1900s, Detroit, one of the wealthiest cities in the world, was on its way to becoming the Motor City. They were the first city to experiment with what would become the North American pattern of development. They were the first ones to run highways through the middle of the neighborhoods, the first ones to have commuter suburbs where people would live outside the city and then commute in for their work. They were the first ones to tear down buildings en masse to create parking lots to facilitate this. They were the first ones to really aggressively grow outward. And when we hit the Great Depression and cities in the US started to literally go bankrupt, like file for bankruptcy, default on their debts, there was one city and a handful of kind of satellites around it that did really fairly well, that being Detroit. So when World War II wound down and we were looking at creating this kinetic growth machine, it was very clear to every politician, to every local mayor and city council member, to every like Rotarian and Chamber of Commerce person, what needed to be done. We needed to copy the development pattern pioneered by our most successful city, that being Detroit. And that's exactly what we did. Detroit's not like some weird place, right? It's just like 2 or 3 decades ahead of everybody else. That's what my mom said was sad. Let's talk about what we do. How do we respond to this challenge? This challenge of having built ourselves into a certain degree of insolvency. I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to do this as a cultural challenge to you. And it's interesting because I've stopped including this slide, except when I come up to Canada. Let's talk about why. But let me go through it here first. There's a saying out of Silicon Valley that I really, really like that kind of captures the spirit of Strong Towns and the spirit of, I think, where we're at. It goes like this: innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb, while innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. If I ask all you good Canadians here, do you prefer smart to dumb? You will say, absolutely. Don't give us dumb systems, Chuck. Give us smart systems. That's what we want. We run very good government. We're, very prudent people. But I'm going to tell you, you have an overwhelming preference for order over chaos. You have an overwhelming preference. We do too. It's less pronounced than yours. Yours is overwhelming. You have an overwhelming preference for order over chaos. And you will tolerate a lot of dumb in order to not experience any kind of messiness, right? I'm going to pick on my friends from Medicine Hat for a little bit. We just finished a year-long engagement with the city of Medicine Hat. What a beautiful city. What a wonderful group of people. They're really heroes. A lot of the stuff that they're doing is very heroic. One of the issues that they dealt with was street seating. During the pandemic, a lot of the restaurants wanted to have street seating. And of course, it was the pandemic. We wanted to make that happen. They did make it happen. And then they went back and formalized it later. When they formalized it, they created a process where to put out street seating, you had to every year fill out a 9-page application, pay hundreds, I think even thousands of dollars to go through this process. It required the approval of 18 different departments. And it took, on average, 6 months. Now, I'm from Minnesota. I understand how long summers are. If you apply for this thing in March, it's not working, right? Like that time frame doesn't work. And they were very frustrated because they couldn't figure out why they weren't getting any street seating and why all the downtown business owners were mad at them. They were They were very stuck in orderly but dumb. They were worried that bad things would happen if they didn't do their job at City Hall to make sure that there was order in the system. And so what they were able to work out was now a new process where instead of having people come and fill out a big application, they fill out a small application. Instead of it getting passed around to 18 departments, we bring 18 departments out on the street and we meet with you and we help walk you through it in real time. And we talk about it. And we can get approval in 24, 48 hours. We need to be thinking of the systems in terms of how much messiness, how much organic change can we create and promulgate? How many little bets can we get started in our neighborhoods? With the understanding that some of them will not work out. But we have to have systems that make many, many small mistakes that we can learn from, as opposed to the way we do it now, which is to make very big mistakes that everyone kind of half-heartedly agrees to, right? This is, I think, a cultural challenge for us. And before I move on, let me give this challenge to you, because this is a very nice-sized group, and you've been very generous in your feedback to me as we've been talking here. It is very important when people go out and try things here, try reforms, try change, that we give them a long leash to figure things out. And the way we give them a long leash is to show up and support it. I think a lot about the way the private sector does innovation. I don't think Google's like the greatest avatar for this, but we can think about Google for a second. Everybody in this room knows Gmail, right? Recognize that Gmail was a product that was first tried out with like 500 people, and then was tried out with 10,000 people, and then was rolled out to 100,000 people. And every time they go and do a beta update, they try it out a little bit. Do you know what those little trials are? It's like, we're going to make all our mistakes, but we're going to make them with 500 people instead of with, the billions of people that use Gmail. When we run our cities, when we build our neighborhoods, what we have to do is we have to have lots of little experiments going on, trying out things and learning from them. That means we make a lot of mistakes, but we make them quick and we make them early and we learn from them. If we look at the way city governments work now, they tend to work in a very defensive mode where we don't want to make a mistake we can be criticized for. And so what we do is what we at Strong Towns call the least dumb thing that consensus provides, right? You all can create room for your leaders to be experimenters. And you can do that by not only backing them when they do it, by demanding that they do it. So let's talk about just a handful of things we can do to get things moving in a different direction. I put this first because I think it's the most important intellectually. We have to lower the bar of entry. I gave you that example from Medicine Hat. It's a high bar of entry to put street seating out. We have to lower that bar of entry. We have to invite more and more people to be part of co-creating our city. We have, through all the best intentions, sidelined a whole bunch of people who are very entrepreneurial, who have a lot at stake here, who want to be part of building the city, would have been involved in building the city 100 years ago, but now are not able to reach that first rung. This is something that in my city we call a tiny house. My ancestors in the same city would have called this a house. For reasons that are not really explainable, we have put the adjective tiny on the front of this and require all kinds of crazy things in order to build what really is a starter home, right? It's a starter home. If you want to build a starter home in my city, you have to meet all the requirements of a house. You have to meet subpart A through M of the tiny house ordinance. You have to go beg permission from your neighbors. You have to genuflect in front of the planning board. You have to prove that, building a starter house won't cause chaos and mayhem in your neighborhood. And then we may let you build one, right? If you go to your oldest neighborhoods today and walk around and you look closely at the homes, what you will see is that your neighborhoods are full of these starter homes. They don't exist like this anymore, right? The ones that are still here have been added on to, have been expanded. Someone will build a very small house, and then once they get a little bit of money, they'll put an addition on. Once a kid is born, they'll put a second story on. The neighbor will come over and help. They'll go help the neighbor. This is how we built places for thousands of years. How many people in this room want to live in a 400 square foot house? How many of you have lived in a 400 square foot house? Yeah, see that? When we take away that rung, when we don't allow people to do that, when we don't make that very, very easy to do, what we do is we sideline a whole bunch of people that should be out helping us build our community. Here is a commercial example of this. This is from Muskegon, Michigan. In Muskegon, Michigan, they had a problem in that their downtown had a lot of vacancies. And they recognized that when they tried to subsidize businesses to move into those vacancies, they were guaranteed to lose money. Those were bad investments for the community. And so they went to people who were local entrepreneurs and they said, what would it take to get you in this downtown building? And they discovered very quickly that to get into the downtown building, you had to do hundreds of thousands of dollars of renovations. You had to put in commercial sprinkler systems. You had to make the bathrooms ADA compliant. You had to do all these things that are good things, but are things that someone trying to figure out how to sell candles to tourists wasn't able to do, right? And so what they did in Muskegon is they went and bought a bunch of storage sheds. They painted them up funky colors. They just plopped them out in a place where they had a gap in their streetscape. And they rent them out very, very cheaply to startup entrepreneurs. Like $75 a month, something like that. If you go there today, you will see these places are always full. Not only are they full of entrepreneurs, they're full of energy, right? There's all kinds of great energy emanating from these spaces. The people who are very excited about their business. If you talk to people, they are in the process of figuring out how to make their business work. If you go to Muskegon and go to their downtown, you're also going to see their downtown is full of businesses. They do not have very many vacancies, if any at all. And a lot of the places that are open now are people who graduated from these storage sheds. They started here, they failed, they figured it out, they failed, they tried again, they failed, they tried again, they failed, they tried again, they figured it out, and now they figured it out and they moved into the downtown spot with confidence. We have to create room for people to experiment, room for people to fail, room for people to figure things out where the stakes are very, very low. At Strong Towns, we have a saying, we need to allow the next increment of development by right. You all have taken a huge step in this in your recent housing ordinance that you approved. The idea is that if we want our neighborhoods to be adaptable, if we want them to be complex, if we want them to work in that complex, adaptive way, we have to actually allow them to breathe. We can't lock them under glass, regulatory amber. We can't seal them up. We have to actually allow them to evolve. In conjunction with this, and I think this is really the brilliance of your approach in your ordinance, the saying that we have at Strong Towns is this: no neighborhood should experience radical change, but no neighborhood can be exempt from change. We have had this deal with ourselves that everybody's neighborhood will be exempt from change. We will keep you all in stasis because that's what everybody prefers. We don't want any messiness. We don't want anything changing. But we will find the poorest neighborhood or the most disenfranchised neighborhood, and that neighborhood will experience radical, radical change. It reinforces the idea that we don't want to be the neighborhood on the outs, and so we all continually fight it. Fight that next increment of change. And what it does is it does a number of things that are destructive to us as a people. The first thing it does from an economic standpoint is it massively drives up our land values and our property values in ways that are not reflective of the underlying market, but are reflective of financial distortions. When you build in only large leaps, everybody's property suddenly becomes valued in large leaps. And it's dysfunctional. It means that people growing up in a neighborhood can't stay there. People in a neighborhood can't leave and move because they can sell their house, but they can't afford the next one they're going to move into. It creates this very dysfunctional relationship we have. It also makes us very anti-growth. A lot of people don't like the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard, the people who show up and oppose things. I get it, but I'm also sympathetic to them in a way because the choice we've given them is between stasis, which most everybody gets to have that choice, or radical transformation. And those are not very good choices. So it creates this dysfunctional system in our culture. And it creates the expectation that things will never change. And the reality is that the world doesn't work that way. Nothing works that way. Nothing that is successful and prosperous over time is successful and prosperous because it doesn't change. It's successful and prosperous because it allows itself to grow. When you look at your neighborhoods, what you should see is an adolescent child that is malnourished. And you shouldn't think of it as something that, if we do this, it will get worse. What you should look at it is you want that adolescent child of a neighborhood to grow into a really strong teenager, and then a really healthy adult, and then a really good middle-aged person. You want to see this neighborhood mature and become a continually better version of itself. Last thing then. Yeah. They asked me on the CBC today, what's one thing that Edmonton can do? And I'm like, I hate that question. I didn't say that. But I do hate that question because the one thing that you can do is just stop building stuff. Stop building roads. You have too many, you cannot maintain all the roads you built, stop building more. Right? You can't maintain all the sewer and water systems you've built. You don't have to clap for that one. Stop building more. You don't need to annex any more land. You don't need to expand the size of the city. You have too much already. Stop. But the question then becomes, what do we do as an alternative, right? Because stop is a very uninspiring strategy, right? I think it's an essential strategy, right? If you're in a hole, stop digging, right? It's an old adage. It makes a lot of sense. It's easy to get your mind around. What do we do differently? And I want you to get excited about what you can do differently. Because what you can do differently is really, really, really exciting, very transformative. But also, if you don't grasp it as a strategy, is going to seem underwhelming to you as well. It's not. It's radical and powerful. We need to actually change our public investment approach to respond to the way people use the city. Today, our public investment approach responds to a number of external things. Remember, we talked about the end of World War II, we're going to turn cities into growth machines. How do we decide where our investment should go? Well, really, I can tell you there's a handful of things that drive most investments. One, what does the developer from outside the community coming in want to invest in? The capital that they can bring in, what are they interested in doing? Two, what does the federal government want us to invest in? What do they have a grant program for? What do they have money for that we can tie into? Where can we bring in that outside money? We need to focus on where people around us are struggling to use the city and respond to that struggle aggressively, systematically, and with a lot of joy. At Strong Towns, we've created a 4-step process to make the lowest risk, highest financial returning investments that we can make in our community. I'm going to go through this with you. Step number 1, go out and humbly observe where people in the community struggle. Where are people having a difficult time using the city as it has been built? I'm going to emphasize humility here. So many times professionals, and I include myself among them here, think we know the answer, we think we know the problem, we think we understand what's going on. I'm saying get all that out of your brain, go out and with true humility, try to understand, where are people having a difficult time? Walk with them, talk with them, experience the city as they experience it. It will shock you the number of struggles that are out there. Step number 2, ask ourselves a question. What is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address this struggle? This seems like an easy question. It's hard. It takes discipline to do this. Because the question you're asking yourself is not, okay, what is the ultimate solution to this problem? Don't ask that question. What is the thing we can get the grant to do? No. We have a capital improvements plan, and we're planning 2 years from now to go out and, no. What is the thing we can do this instant with the materials and the stuff we have on hand? What can we do with cones and duct tape and a shovel and some paint and some elbow grease? What can we do right now to make this struggle a little bit easier? We're not going to solve it. We're not going to fix it forever. We're just going to make it a little bit easier. Step number 3 then, do that thing. Like, go do it right now. Don't form a committee. Don't bring in a consultant. Don't study it just go do it. It's a little tiny thing. Go do it. And then step number 4 is to repeat that process over and over and over. Chuck, this looks like a different kind of government than what we have. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. This looks like the kind of local government that is oriented around people, not oriented around programs and systems. This is a kind of government that looks obsessively at the struggles within the community, as opposed to looks obsessively about capital flows into the community. And this is a kind of local government that any community can do. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter if your neighborhood is very affluent or struggling. We can make improvements every day in our neighborhoods with that little bit of elbow grease, that little bit of effort, that little bit of focus. And if we do this day after day, year after year, decade after decade, what we'll find is that not only can we make the lowest risk, highest returning investments that it is possible to make in a place, building wealth and opportunity for people, but we cannot help but improve people's lives. And ultimately, that is the essence of a Strong Towns approach. We are squandering resources today, resources that will not be around in the future. We are committing ourselves to massive liabilities for things that we don't really even value. With a different mindset, with a different approach, with a different orientation, with a different understanding of what a city is. It's not an appendage of the federal government. It's not an appendage of top-down policy. It is the way we collaborate together. If we can look at a city in that way, we can build an immense level of prosperity for ourselves. I'm going to end there. Thank you so very much. I will mention, because I know it's being recorded, so my team's going to watch this. They get mad at me if I don't say certain things. We have 2 books. If you're interested in this conversation, that would be book 1, Strong Towns. The other book, book 2, focuses largely on transportation. I have made this announcement a couple times, but it is actually official now. This book, let me go back. This stupid clicker, this is the last time I'm ever using it. This book is coming out in April. It is all about housing and how we respond to the housing crisis. I found out yesterday that you can actually pre-order it now, which is really, really cool. I'm super excited about this book because, again, like we just finished talking about, the strategies in this book are not strategies for others to do. It's not stuff that like the federal government can do for us or housing developers can do for us. It's stuff that we can do for ourselves to make our city stronger and better and provide a lot more housing for a lot more people. So I'm really excited to share that one with you. If you are interested in Strong Town stuff, Our website is strongtowns.org, and we publish many, many articles every week. We have 3 different podcasts, a bunch of videos that we do. Everything we do is Creative Commons licensed. We're a nonprofit organization. We make all of our stuff available for free. And when I say Creative Commons licensed, it is free for you to use. So I tell people, if I've written something that you really like, you're like, wow, that's really smart. You can copy and paste it and pretend you wrote it. Like, I'm totally fine with that. We are really trying to share these ideas with as many people as we can. And so please take the liberty to do that. You'd be doing me a lot of honor by going and telling someone else who's not here tonight about the things we've talked about. So, perfect. Thank you. Yeah.